Hello and welcome to In the District, the program that brings you the most current affairs from a local Bronx perspective. I am Javier E. Gomez. Today we talk about media. As commercial media continues to shrink, there is an urgent need for local, non-profit media to fill the void that is being left by disappearing or downsizing for-profit local newspapers, radio, and television stations. This issue poses a huge challenge for non-profit media organizations, which now must have more resources to do their work. To talk about solutions, a new initiative that could help, and the vital role of community media in the current landscape, we welcome Pulitzer Prize finalist Jim Heaney, editor and executive director of the Investigative Post. Hi, Jim.
Hello there, sir.
It is a pleasure to meet you. I know you are stationed in Buffalo. We are in the Bronx. People don't ask, why is this happening? It will make sense, I assure you. How are things in Buffalo? How's the weather treating you?
Well, it snowed overnight. Big surprise. It's kind of a miserable afternoon, but it's December, and that's kind of par for the course, I guess.
Buffalo is a lovely city. I always love to visit. I have very fond memories of Buffalo. So receive a warm welcome from the Bronx. Now, Jim, before we begin the conversation, please tell us a little bit about you. What do you do?
My career has been in newspapers. I worked at the Orlando Sentinel in Orlando, Florida. Back in the 80s, I was an investigative reporter at the Buffalo News for 25 years. I left and founded Investigative Post in 2012, so we've been around for 13 years. We focus on investigative reporting, as our name would suggest. We focus on government, urban affairs, economic development, criminal justice. We have a small but accomplished staff, and we broke in our share of major stories here. So, you know, much like a lot of other digital nonprofit outlets, we're trying to fill at least a part of the void being created by the downsizing of the daily newspaper, and of late of television stations in town as well.
Jim, with your background in journalism, you could have probably gotten a job in any major news organization in the country. Why did you choose to go solo and establish your own platform?
I wanted to be my own boss. I guess that's my former bosses would say that I could be incorrigible at times. So go work for yourself. I think I had a vision for what I wanted a news organization to be, and I've tried to build Investigative Post using that vision, trying to inject that DNA into what we do. So I'm quite happy with the way we've progressed over the years.
When you think back to your career, Jim, what do you think have been the most significant changes in journalism here in America?
Oh, it's been huge. I mean, when I was a young reporter back in the 80s, there was this newfangled piece of technology called the fax machine, and you know, we've moved a million gazillion miles past the fax machine. You know, there was no internet at that point. When I first started in the business, we were all on typewriters, not even computers. So the ability for journalists to do their jobs from a technology perspective is light years better than it was. I think it's more challenging these days because I think government in particular is mastered the art of throwing roadblocks in the way of journalists in a way that you didn't see, you know, back in the late 70s when I started. You know, government is much more hostile to the public's right to know, and journalists being kind of in the front lines of trying to give the public what they need to know. It's a much more difficult working environment, I think, probably across the board. I don't think that's unique to Buffalo or New York State. I think that's across the country.
It's pretty dire, Jim, that this happens at a moment where people seem to need it more. That there seems to be one of the peak moments in the nation's history for media to be healthy and thriving.
Yeah, I think the need has never been greater because of, I think because of well, a couple of reasons. Because of the political environment, I think the need for people to get accurately reported news and fact-based journalism is really, really important. And just the multitude of options people have. And there's such a concerted effort on the part of a lot of bad actors to try and misinform the public for their own political gains, that it's kind of the Wild West at this point, and it's chaotic, and it's not good.
Jim, you recently wrote a very powerful op-ed dissecting the media landscape in the state and kind of broadly. Some of the numbers that you mentioned are terrifying, and I don't want to be pessimistic because there's a way to figure this whole thing out. But can you walk me through some of your findings and your reporting in that op-ed?
Well, over the course of the last really 20 to 30 years, particularly the last 15 to 20 years, newspapers have lost most of their reporting staffs. Depending on the estimate, up to 3/4 of journalism jobs in newspapers have disappeared. And that's because newspaper revenues have shrunk dramatically as well. So as newspapers' revenues decline, they cut their expenses. Reporters and editors and photographers are a major expense to a newspaper. And so as revenues get cut, expenses get cut, and that plays out in the newsroom first and foremost. Television has economically been doing better, although they are also now starting to feel the impact of the internet on their audience and on their revenues. And of late, public broadcasting has taken a big hit as the federal government this summer eliminated the modest funding that has been provided PBS and NPR stations.
You have started to organically highlight the consequences or the impact of local media shutting down, disappearing, or being bought by corporations in local communities. Can you tell me more about what are the multiple consequences of what we now call media deserts, local communities that have no local newspaper, no local TV station, and those that remain are in the brink of disappearing?
Well, there's just an absence of information, and a democratic society depends on news and information and facts, so people as voters can make informed decisions. I think that's part of it. Another part of it is, there's 3 branches of government, but the press has been regarded as the 4th estate, which our job is to keep an eye on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd estate. And without that check, there's been studies that have shown as media coverage declines, so does voter participation. Corruption tends to increase. Civil society does not function as well. Journalism is critical to a functioning democracy. So as journalism suffers, democracy suffers at the same time. It's kind of it's not the only cause, but it is a major cause of what we're seeing happening in our society and in our democracy.
Jim, before we go to a short break, I wouldn't want to let you go to break without checking. What can you say about the apparent lack of confidence from the public in media, and what are the changes in how people consume their media, how they get their news, and who they get them from?
In terms of how people get their news, it used to be a generation or two ago it was primarily newspapers and television. Right now, and there's been numerous studies done on this polling. Um, when asked, what is your preferred source of news? Newspapers are now the preferred source of news for 5% of the adult population. 5%. Of various digital platforms, be it websites, social media, even podcasts, are now preferred by a majority of people. Television is still strong, not as strong as it was, but still strong. The shifts you're seeing demographically is younger people are not consuming newspapers. They're not consuming television news nearly to the extent of the older generation. Everything is switching to online and to digital platforms, and that's a way of life going forward. In terms of the public's perception of the media, I think there are a couple things going on. And again, some of the polling bears this out. I think that when it comes to local news outlets, be they print or digital or broadcast, I think what's happening nationally, I think there are two things happening nationally that influence you read about how people are, great mistrust in the press. I think part of that goes back to cable news and the phenomena of talking heads. And too much of what's on cable news are opinions. There are people yelling at each other. It's kind of a chaotic scene, so to speak. And I think a lot of people are turned off by that type of news. But I think they then project their distaste for that onto all media. We were all kind of tainted by that. I think a second reason why trust has declined is because there's been a concerted effort on the part of the radical right in this country to try and discredit the media. And it's found an audience within their constituency. There's this constant drumbeat of fake news and all that kind of real nonsense. But it's being done for political purposes because the right recognizes that a healthy press is going to inform the public on the way things really are, and not the distorted view of how the right views what's going on in this country and on this world. So you get a combination of cable, the distortion of cable news, the actions of Trump and the radical right in this country.
After the break, more about community media solutions that would bring fairness and equity in resources and what you could do to help. Don't go away. are in the district, and we continue our conversation with Pulitzer Prize finalist Jim Heaney, editor and executive director of the Investigative Post. The topic: the importance of community media and the need for fair resources for nonprofit media to thrive. Jim, let's talk about solutions. I know there is a legislation in New York, please correct me if I am mistaken, that provides incentives for small newspapers and certain broadcast stations for employing and hiring people and keeping people employed. Now, it doesn't apply to nonprofit media such as BronxNet TV. Can you tell me about that legislation and why is it that it excludes community media?
Well, 2 years ago, the legislature passed a bill which the governor signed, which provides tax credits to newspapers and select television stations for profit, and they're in the form of tax credits, $25,000 per employee per year, and it's an effort to try and stem the hemorrhaging of jobs. Particularly in the newspaper business. It applies to privately owned weekly newspapers, as well as chain-operated, publicly traded chain operations such as Gannett, which owns a dozen newspapers in New York State, Lee Enterprises, which owns several papers, including the Buffalo News here in my hometown, and the tax credits were not extended to nonprofits because under the state tax code, you can't give a tax credit to somebody who doesn't pay taxes. Nonprofits are exempt from paying corporate taxes. So there's been a subsequent effort to try and change some minds in Albany about that, which did not succeed. So in the past 4 or 5 months, the nonprofit sector in New York State, there's about 20 digital nonprofit outlets around the state that focus on local and state news. There's Investigative Post here in Buffalo. There are digital outlets elsewhere in upstate New York, including Ithaca and Syracuse and the Adirondacks, and there are a number down there in New York City. The Gothamist, which is part of the WNYC family, the City, New York Focus, and some others. And we've been working. So there's that constituency. You've got public broadcasters in the form of PBS and NPR stations, of which there are about 20 throughout the state. And then there's the public access folks like you. And there are about 50 public access channels around the state as well. We're all nonprofit, and we've been working with a national organization called Rebuild Local News. And what we're trying to do is get equitable funding that's comparable to what the for-profit sector has gotten. And I think our argument is in part that as the legacy media, the established newspapers and televisions, as their staffs shrink, their coverage shrinks, communities are suffering from less news to consume, and we're stepping up and filling part of that void. And we're looking at if the state can do for the for-profits, we think the state could do for the nonprofits
now,
as well.
Jim, given that not-for-profit media cannot have tax credits, would the proposed expansion of the program, would it be in the form of what, of grants?
Yeah, it would be in the form of grants. They'd have to be no strings attached. You know, there's an unease, I think, in the media business in general about accepting any form of government money because we are government watchdogs. But there's plenty of examples of where government money has been provided to broadcasters, and particularly in this country, there's been funding since the 70s for NPR and PBS stations, and they have been able to act independently of the government. You can build some firewalls in to make sure that government doesn't influence what the media does. And in Europe, Europe is really a leader. The European Union, which is 25 plus countries, are spending in excess of $5 billion a year funding public media, primarily public media, a little bit of private media. And in researching the story that you referenced earlier, I came across, ratings of the most democratic countries in the world. And 9 of the 10 most democratic countries in the world are in the European Union. And I don't think it's just a coincidence that these democratic countries are aggressively funding public media. Because again, journalism is important to the functioning of democracy. So if you're investing in journalism, you're investing in a healthy democracy. And so that's kind of our pitch, in a sense, that we're trying to fill a void. Journalism is a public good that deserves public support.
At this taping, Jim, at this moment, what has happened to move this proposal forward, and what are the next steps? What's next?
Well, the nonprofit sector, the aforementioned nonprofit sector, the digital outlets, the PBS and NPR folks, and the public access folks have been meeting and collaborating, putting together a proposal that Rebuild Local News has submitted to the Hochul administration, in the hopes that the governor will include that in her executive budget that will be presented the middle of January. If that happens, then I think it stands a good chance of being adopted in the state budget by the legislature. If it doesn't happen, then there's an opportunity to go directly to legislators to get the budget to include that money. But we're hoping that the governor sees fit to support it. It's, this is going to be a tough budget year for New York with all the federal cuts coming in Medicaid aid and in other areas. But it's a budget. It's a budget in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and our program is projected to cost, I think, no more than $15 million a year. So it's kind of small potatoes, and we think a good investment. The digital outlet part of our coalition. 15 years ago, there were fewer than 30 nonprofit digital outlets in the entire country. There are now over 500. We are the only part of the media ecosystem that's growing. So in addition to being an investment in democracy, I think it's a good investment in economic development, because it will protect jobs, it will create jobs, and there's plenty of opportunity for growth. There are large sections of upstate that have no digital outlets, most of the southern tier. If you follow the thruway from Syracuse to Albany all the way to the state line, there's nothing east of Syracuse, with the exception of an outlet up in the Adirondacks. So there's a lot of room for growth, but that growth depends on revenue.
Jim, how can people help and make their voices heard about this issue?
That's a good question. At this point, I think letting your state legislator know that you support public financing through the state for no strings attached support of nonprofit media would be a good place to start.
So it has to happen. It's pretty timely.
Yeah. I mean, a budget will be adopted. They're supposed to have it adopted by April. It may be May or even June, but over the next 6 months or so, the tale will be told.
Thank you, Jim, for joining us today. You have definitely an invitation to join us here at the studio when you come to New York City.
Well, I'll do that to come see my Yankees.
I love that. And thanks everyone for watching. And remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on BronxNet.org and YouTube. Make sure to follow us on social media to find out who will be our next guest in the district.